Hello, everyone. It's Dina at the Realize Foundation, and today I'm here with James Boomhower, better known as Boomer. Apparently, all of his friends and colleagues call him that. So, James, welcome, and I'm excited. Some of you may know James. He wrote in our first Scars to Stars book, and he also has been an integral part of helping me start this foundation in the first place and helping me understand some things about the suicide world and the things that maybe I wasn't privy to in the beginning. And so James has been a really big asset to us as we got started and has been on our board for a long time. So, James, I want you to introduce yourself and tell people about your experience in the first responder world because you can do it way better than me.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Dina. I really appreciate it. As she said, my name is James Boomhower, better known as Boomer in the first responder community. I have been in EMS for just shy of 20 years, been a paramedic for 18 of those years. I've done just about every facet of pre hospital emergency medicine you can do, commercial, private, fire based. I've currently spent the last 9 years of my life as a critical care transport specialist for Boston MedFlight in Boston, Massachusetts. Most currently, I am wrapping up a graduate degree in clinical psychology to become a licensed mental health counselor. The idea of creating Stay Fit for Duty really revolves around the idea of first responders helping first responders and really building that bridge of cultural competence from the responder community to the mental health community and ensuring that we can best support one another and best vet some of the resources that we can utilize when we need more advanced support.
That's great. He's a wealth of information. And I think it's so important to know. Like, I remember one time I called you and I was like, James, is it okay to ask people if they're suicidal? Because it's there's a lot of controversy about that, or at least that I was seeing when I first started the Realize Foundation. So would you talk a little bit? I mean, I know the answer, but I want people to hear from you.
Absolutely. And Dina, you're absolutely right. That question remains controversial in some circles, if I'm being honest. The answer is yes. It is always okay to ask someone that you're concerned about if they're having thoughts of self harm, suicide, or any form of self injury. The old thought process used to be that if I ask someone if they're thinking about dying by suicide or if they have a plan, then I'm going to put the idea in their head. And we know that's just not true. And when we look at the risk stratification of me asking versus me not asking, if I ask, I know I'm not going to put the idea in someone's head. I'm not going to take someone who wasn't suicidal or wasn't thinking about harming themselves and push them to being suicidal or thinking about harming themselves. I may get an honest answer from that person and be able to bridge them to some help. So it is absolutely a net positive. Always ask if you're concerned if a friend is thinking about or acting as though they want to perform some self injurious behavior or thinking of dying by suicide.
Thank you. I think it's important for people to hear that from someone who has as much experience as you, because I have lived experience and I have a lot of research, but I don't have the psychology degree and I'm not a counselor. I'm not a medical person in any way. So it's good to hear that from someone of your stature because it goes a long way. So thank you.
Thank
Um,
you for asking the question.
I also want to ask you about what you're doing now, specifically with Stay Fit for Duty, and also your newfound, um, working on your masters and what that looks like. So, whichever one you want to talk about first.
Busy, busy is the answer. Yeah. So what Stay Fit for what Stay Fit for Duty is doing right now is we're doing a handful of things. We are presenting all across the country primarily to aviation and healthcare and first responder communities about the importance of recognizing mental health within the workplace and talking about this idea of resilience and resistance and how can I stay strong and keep my self-care in tip-top shape so I'm not affected by what I see every day. And then much more realistically, when I am inevitably affected by what I see every day, how can I build and foster my resilience, which will help me bounce back from that adverse experience? Stay Fit for Duty also works to help create peer support platforms. I'm incredibly fortunate. I'm just starting to work with a peer support platform out west and help a HEMS and critical care transport agency create their first peer support team, which is very cool. I'm elated to have the opportunity to do that. Finally, we are ICISF, which is the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation instructors. So I also host and put forth some of the trainings that you need to become a peer supporter in this space. On the master's and grad school side of the coin, I am completing my graduate degree in clinical psychology. And what that means right now is a whole lot of school and a whole lot of internships. I am a graduate clinical intern with a psychiatry practice out in Massachusetts, where I do a combination of telehealth sessions and in person sessions under clinical supervision.
That's awesome. I'm so excited for everything that's happening for you. Um, yeah, and I also want to say that, you know, for those of you listening that may not know what the Realize Foundation is, but you know Boomer, I want you to understand what we do, and that is that we um we publish books with people's stories, and they're called Scars to Stars, and we've had 3 best-selling books. We've had 54 stories in our 3 books, and the purpose of the story is to let people know they're not alone, to let people know that someone else has struggled with something they might be going through, and that it's okay to talk about it. And that's what our community is all about, is how do we talk about these hard conversations around mental health and suicide, um, whether it's someone who is having suicidal ideation or whether maybe it's somebody who's lost someone to suicide. Anything surrounding that issue is what we talk about in a way where we can support each other. And it's a great community. It's a great place to come if you're wanting to tell a story as well. If you're interested in writing in one of our books, you can go to our website and apply. I'm just gonna put that up while you can go there and learn more about our books that are already published. You can apply to tell your own story. You can see videos. You could see our whole YouTube channel with all our podcast episodes. But we also have an official podcast that's audio only that you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts. So I just wanted to kind of give people a little overview. And we are planning a 4th anniversary Zoom call. It's just for fun on March 30th. And you can find that on our social media anywhere, or I need to add it to our website. I'll get that done today. But yeah, we're looking forward to having some trivia and some prizes and just some fun around hearing from people who've been involved and what they've taken away from what we're doing. But James, maybe you could talk about your perspective of what we're doing and like what you've seen since you've been involved, or what resonates with you.
Absolutely. First and foremost, the Realize Foundation community is awesome. We're talking about a book now that is 4 years old. And if the book is 4 years old, that means we've been working on it for 5 years, right? So the number of connections that I made and friends that I have and people that I still communicate with solely from working with the Realize Foundation has been huge. What I like most about the Realize Foundation is we give people an opportunity to share their story, right? We have paramedics, firefighters, EMTs, medical helicopter providers. We have all these people in this, what is otherwise considered to be kind of underrepresented space in the mental health community, and they can share their story. And once that stories in print, then we can look and say, okay, read this story, look at this story. Here is someone who was able to tell that story, who was able to put it in print, who's able to share it with a larger community. And the hope is that that makes people in similar spaces feel less alone. Or maybe someone will say, wow, like these fancy healthcare providers, right, also experience stress and trauma and fatigue and depression and suicidal thoughts. If they can do it, I feel way less alone or isolated in how I do. One of the things I liked most about the first edition of Scars to Stars that was just echoed through subsequent volumes was the variety of the stories, right? We had a business owner, we had a mom, we had someone talking about loss and pregnancy, we had a first responder, right? We had all of these individuals to really cover this breadth of information. So it wasn't just a whole bunch of firefighters and paramedics telling their stories or a whole bunch of entrepreneurs sharing their stories. It really harkened to how human an experience it is to feel this way and to experience this trauma, and where to go to get help and what help worked for who and how does that all look at the end of the day.
Yes, absolutely. It's true because I think sometimes people get the idea that everything we do and all of our stories and books are all about suicide. And that's not necessarily true. There is a lot of those stories. Um, but I think the bigger picture for me is, what are the struggles that people are going through that get them to suicidal ideation? What are those stories of abuse, addiction, financial stress, all of these other things that start you down that road? And how can we address that and fix it before you get there? So that's a really big deal for me, because if we wait until people are in the stage of suicidal ideation, it's harder to help them. It's harder to help them get to a better place. If we help them with, like, I go out and have too many drinks every night. If we can start there, then maybe they don't even get to that point. And so that's really the bigger picture for me.
Absolutely. I working in the space that I work in, I make a million metaphors on mental health to medical health and physical health because they're much easier to see. And many of us have shared those experiences. And if I can tie those together, I think it's easier for some people to conceptualize. It's no different than saying if I go to my primary care doctor or if I eat right and exercise, I'm less likely to need an emergency department. So if I'm proactive with my mental health, if I start to recognize when things are a little shaky and I'm in need of a little bit of support, I might not need to call a crisis line at 3 in the morning. And I love crisis lines. Crisis lines and peer support are where I got my start in the mental health space. But they're a band-aid, right? They're a temporary solution to a bigger problem, and we need them. They're imperative. They keep us safe. No different than ambulances and emergency departments, right? Ambulances and emergency departments cannot be the crux of healthcare, but they're absolutely there and do very well when you're in an emergency. So I completely agree the idea of helping you zoom out and say, you can get support now. You can get support when you don't feel like you need support.
Hmm.
In a perfect world, I want every human to have a primary care doctor, a dentist, and a mental health professional, right? And I'm stealing that from a friend of mine because it's perfect, right? Imagine you wake up, you get your job, and they're like, okay, welcome to work. Here's your primary care, your dentist, and your mental health professional. It takes so much of the cognitive load off of trying to find that support when you're in crisis or you do desperately need it. And now you have what seems like this tremendously daunting task ahead of you of now having to get the ball rolling and starting to find support.
That's a really good analogy, because we all need support in our lives, whether it's support at work or support at home, or like you said, in the medical community, for our health, and our health and our mental health should just be health. I
Yep.
mean, I don't understand why we have to separate our brain from the rest of our body. Like,
Right.
we just need support for our health in general. And you know our brain is a miraculous thing, and we just need to take care of it. And when we are going through an addiction or abuse or some kind of trauma, it is hard for us to take care of our brain in the way that we're supposed to, or the way we need to help us, be okay. And so I like that, in the first book, your chapter, I think the title was Helpers Can't Need Help, was, or do I have
Yeah,
it wrong?
helpers can need help. Yep.
Okay. So will you talk about why you wrote that? Like what, because you were really passionate about it at the beginning, and you used to talk a lot about that, and now I think you've surpassed that into a deeper conversation, but I want you to talk about that for a minute.
Absolutely. I reference a single story, and I think what is so important to recognize is there were probably 100 stories before that, to Dina's earlier point, that I just didn't recognize, right? Or thought was something else, or thought was just me being new, or what have you. This story starts when I already had about 10, 12 years in the profession. So it was not new by any stretch of the imagination, but I was new to the role of critical care transport provider and really new in this space of having a completely different obligation and responsibility to my patients and the teams that I worked alongside. And I had a call go terribly. And it was no fault of my own. I was definitely disappointed by my reactivity to the event. I would have loved to have sprang into action sooner, and I would have loved if the call could have ended differently. But I was deeply affected by watching the real time death of another human and being helpless in that moment. There were plenty of things that I could do to try to temporize the situation, but I was not capable of the solution. Right? We were not an operating room. We were not the definitive care that this individual needed. And watching that death in real time with family that was grieving in real time was really, really impactful. And I struggled for quite some time with this idea of maintaining this bravado of this really strong machismo paramedic that could do the thing and was really there and fancy. And my team had asked if I was okay, but I was very new, and God forbid, right? I didn't want to show them that I had any weakness. So I said, yeah, yeah, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. I went home and I drank my face off. And I woke up passed out in the same flight suit that I was treating patients in 8 hours before. The idea that that was in some way, shape, or form an appropriate response to the trauma that I'd seen and a continued appropriate response, right? I'd be lying if I said that was the first time I'd ever gone down that path. That was a learned behavior, right? Bad call equals whiskey and all this and that, and how really dramatic it was, and how I realized that my options were continue down this path and have a much shorter career and likely harm myself in some way, shape, or form, or do the infinitely scarier thing of asking my close personal friends, my significant other, and some professionals for help. And I realized that in getting the help, it was much easier for me to share my story. And as I shared my story, it was much easier for other members of the responder and healthcare provider space. It's a big umbrella. It was easier for them to say, oh, I've been there. Hey, who are you talking to? How did you find that help? And it was much easier for me to heal while simultaneously helping my brothers and sisters in this profession.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's whether we're talking about the first responder community or we're talking about professionals in the event world, whatever we're talking about, it's hard for people to ask for help. It's hard for people to speak up about this kind of scenario we're talking about. And I think it's imperative that people understand that it's okay to ask for help and speak up. And that's why we're here, to try to make it normal that we have these conversations, because we can't get the help we need or the support we need without speaking up.
Right.
And the reason I'm so passionate about this, if you guys follow me at all, that I stayed totally silent about my suicide attempt for 23 years. until I lost a friend. And then it became really real that I should have spoken up and I should have made it normal to talk about, because that's what people need. People need to know it's okay. And I never thought it was. I was in a professional leadership role and I did not feel like it was okay for me to talk about. And in 2019, when I started talking about it, I think it wasn't necessarily well received by everyone around me. I owned a business, I had employees, I had clients, and I was really nervous that I was going to lose, you know, I was going to lose business or I was going to lose employees because I was talking about suicide. And for the most part, it was the opposite reaction. There was a lot of support, a lot of care that came my way because I did speak up. And so I just want people to know it's okay. You can call me, you can call James, you can talk to anybody in our community. You can come in our Facebook group and just listen what other people are saying. Whatever it is that makes you comfortable enough to talk about whatever you're going through. Maybe you're not ready to write your story and be published on Amazon, but maybe you're ready to read some of the stories we have so you can understand what other people have been through and how they've gotten through it. And so I just want to make sure that message comes across in this podcast, because it's really important that people know they're not alone and there's hope and there's other people that have been there before you have, even though it feels like you're in this situation all by yourself and nobody could possibly understand. And I've been there, and I think James has been there. So we understand that. But I just, I don't know. I think that message is the crux of why we do what we do.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. To clarify, I am not in the capacity of a crisis line, right? Please don't reach out at 3 a.m. in crisis, because I may not be available, right? There are other crisis lines available, and admittedly, I staff them sometimes, so you may connect with me in some way, shape, or form. But to ask the questions, ask me anything about mental health. Ask me about the great therapists that I have and still have. Ask me about the therapists that weren't necessarily my speed. Ask me about the therapist I saw when my really good friend and coworker died by suicide, who was awful. Now, I'm going to say awful to me, because I don't believe that person was awful to every human they interacted with, but really misaligned. And it did a number on me. It really pushed me away from the mental health field for a little while. Like, please ask those questions. When I work in the mental health capacity now as a clinical intern, I am as transparent as humanly possible with the process. Right? Here's what it's going to look like. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what might feel great, what might feel awful. This is all normal. I think it is so important for us to work to demystify that. And it's often easiest to come to someone who isn't sitting across the couch from you as a mental health professional. But by all means, ask those questions so we can help guide you at a minimum through our lived experience of the process.
Yeah. And I think that we do have some resources on our website, um, and Stay Fit for Duty is one of them. There are some others that we're working on getting up there. The most common question I get is about teens. And I don't really feel like I am the expert on that. I don't have children that are teens. I don't, it's been a long time since I was a teen. So it's we have two wonderful organizations that I work with, and one is called Bionic. It's an acronym for Believe It or Not I Care, and it's Sandy Austin, and she um, was a school counselor in Colorado for years and years, and has started this program that she helps schools implement for kids to reach out to each other and be supportive to each other. It's really awesome. And the other one is the Teen Suicide Prevention Society, which they call Teaspoons because it's TSPS. So you can go to teaspoons.org, I think, to get to them, or you can Google their name. And Katie Miller and her mom had that up, and they really do have a great process of questions, just like James is talking about, of how to start a conversation with somebody, even in a school. And it's not invasive, it's not aggressive. It's a very cool process that they give you to start a conversation about this. So I hope that you will look at both of them if you have teens or you have a bullying situation in your family or something like that. It's a really good resource. Um, but I don't know. What do you have to add, James? Anything?
No, I think this was great. I just want to remind people that it's okay to not be okay. I
Mm-hmm.
think we started to like conceptualize that during the COVID pandemic. I think
Mm-hmm.
it was really like shined in our face, right? Of how fragile our mental health system is and how fragile our beliefs on mental health are. I think what is important for me to say is now that the pandemic is over, right? And I'm not here to start a big discussion on COVID pneumonia or anything like that, not at all. But now that the chaos has ended and we've kind of settled into what the world looks like now is when we start to process that trauma, right? On the very micro aspect, I ask you to think about a car accident. Everyone here has either been in or seen a car accident. You see people like get in this huge car accident and they get out of their car and they're walking around. And you're like, oh my God, sit down. Like the ambulance is coming. You must be hurt. Look at all this stuff that happened. And they say, no, I'm fine. I just have to go to work. I have to do this. I have to do that. We recognize that as like an early form of shock, right? And this idea that like, I'm totally fine, even though my arm is broken. All of that is to say that when we are undergoing a ton of trauma, our brain essentially clicks into survival mode. And survival mode 300 years ago and 3,000 years ago looks way different than survival mode today. I have to go to school. I have to get the kids on the bus. I have to do this. I have to make dinner. I have to do that. We talk about this, especially with parents, and just this innate resilience of my life's falling apart, but my kids have to eat, right? I have to come up with some way to feed them. I have to do this. I have to do that. Once the trauma goes away, and again, not trying to make a big political or philosophical discussion on COVID, but once things normalize, our brain says, okay, I think it's safe. Let me start to process this trauma. And what I want to do, not only talking about COVID, but talking about responders and talking about people who wonder why, when they start to talk about this trauma from 10, 15, 20 years ago starts piling up, because our brain truly does wait for that safe space, if you will, before it says, okay, I can let my foot off the gas a little bit and I can start to process this trauma. That is not a sign of weakness. It is not a sign of profound institutionalized mental illness. It
Mm-hmm.
is purely a trauma response of how our brain is processing or defragging all of the trauma that it's seen. So give yourself some grace if it's 2024 and you're like, can we talk about 2021? Because that was awful. It doesn't make you abnormal or unusual or anything. It's just how your brain takes the time to process it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And 2020 was a very big processing year for me because it was right after I started speaking up about my suicide attempt. And it was also after losing my friend in 2018. And I also lost my business that year. So it was I can relate, as most people listening probably can, to that analogy of processing the pandemic, because for me it actually gave me the time to process things from before, um, but it also caused more like piled up, more on top.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that we do acknowledge it and process it, and don't wait 20 years like I did, to address it now so you don't have to carry around that depression and anxiety and all the things that go with it.
Yep.
It's really freeing. People had told me and throughout my life, like, you should journal. And I was like, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy, you know? But in 2020, I started journaling, and that is really what started the healing process for me. And so, if somebody is in that place, try it, see how it works for you. I also went to therapy for the first time in, I don't know, 23 years. And so it was eye opening. And sometimes I just, I think just having someone listen, even if they didn't tell me what to do or what was wrong, just having someone listen was a big deal. And whether it's a family member that's just being supportive and listening, or whether it's a therapist, depending on, your situation and what you need. Um, but people who are close to someone struggling with mental health often ask me, how do I help them? And I do say, like, just listen, just be there, because that's they need to get it out of their head and their thoughts and words, and it helps. And I'm not a therapist, and you might have better advice, but that's really, um to someone who is, has a spouse or a child that's really struggling with mental health. And I think, trying to make them talk about a certain subject or a certain event is not always the best thing, in my opinion. It's more about listening to what they're feeling and what they need or what they want to talk about. Because I know when I didn't want to talk and somebody was trying to make me, it just pushed me further away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice, and I think it's important to remember that, with some rare exceptions in the mental health community, a vast majority of mental health professionals are here to listen and to reflect and to allow you to come to your own solutions. Right? I'm not the one to be like, Dina, no, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that, right? And again, there are some sects of the mental health community that do that as their form of therapy, and for some individuals that works really well. But a vast majority of mental health professionals will listen, reflect with you, and help you, guide you to your own solution. And that thought process is important to know, because if you sit into a therapist's office and say, here's my story in 30 seconds, what's wrong with me and how do I fix it, you're going to be disappointed with the results.
Mhm.
If you know that you have those supports, they can be really helpful. And to Dina's point too, family, friends, right, social networks, these whole pieces, presence is way more powerful than we give it credit for, right? A quick check in, hey, it's been a minute, I'm thinking of you, text matters a lot more than we think. I think all too often we say, oh, I know James is going through a hard time. I have to make him food. I have to drive it to his house. I have to, be there with him while he eats. And I simply don't have 4 hours to take away from my family to devote to him. A text message, a phone call. I got really sick a handful of weeks ago, and a really good friend of mine sent me a Grubhub gift card. And it might as well have been on a silver platter. It was like, I don't have to cook and I don't have to pay for it. Oh my God, this is amazing. So, presence is really individualized and rarely needs to be as intensive and as time consuming as we think that it needs to
Yeah, it's true. Just having someone there, because, there are a lot of people in the world who live alone, and just having someone there, even if it's just to watch a movie or
be.
play cards or something, it really does help. So think about that, and the people in your life, and who might need a text or a Grubhub um, gift card. Who knows? Well, thank you all for being here and listening. And I hope that you've learned something. And I hope you reach out to our community. We have a Facebook group called Scars to Stars Live, and anyone can find it and ask to join. And you can also just check out our website, see what resources we have there that could help you or help someone in your life. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. And if you'd like to know more about Stay Fit for Duty and what I offer on the first responder and healthcare provider side of the coin, you can find me at stayfit, the number 4, stayfitforduty.org, or Instagram, Twitter at stay_fit4duty, or Facebook at Stay Fit for Duty.
Awesome. And we do have that on our website. I'm just going to check that the links are current, because I think I might have an old one, but I'll get that from you when we're done.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me, Dina, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thanks, James.
Take care.